When I rode an aero looper for the first time, I did not really like it. When I rode an aero looper for a second time, I didn't really like it. But as I ride more and more of these janky loopers, the more and more I appreciate these rides. There are a total of 27 aero loopers, not including clones. I know it's a lot, so we'll be quick about what we are talking about. This list does include defunct coasters, which brings up the fact, yes, I have not ridden all these coasters. However, I have ridden 4 aero loopers and generally know what these coasters feel like. I will take into account others' reviews and make some of the decisions myself. Just as an FYI, this is one of the hardest lists we had to make, and while we have made some mistakes in our other ranking videos, this one might have a little more discrepancies than usual, especially because the clones had so many different reviews, but we tried our very best. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get straight into it. We have a lot of coasters to cover. Coming up in the last spot is Shockwave. This is a defunct coaster, and it's defunct for a reason. On paper, this was like an amazing coaster. It has way more elements than half of the coasters on this list, and is incredibly forceful. The problem is, this coaster is rough, like way too rough. There are horror stories of injuries, concussions, and freak accidents that have led this coaster to where it is now. It's a very easy coaster to place last because of how painful it was and how many people it hurt. In the 26th spot is Steel Phantom. This is the predecessor to Phantom's Revenge, and it's nowhere close to how good its reimagining is. This coaster, for the same reasons as Shockwave, sucked. It opened as the fastest and steepest roller coaster in the world, as well as being the tallest coaster that had an inversion. This coaster was straight painful and hurting people left and right. They did install twin brakes to help combat the pain, but we know the end result. We got a Morgan retrofitting and a world-class coaster in Phantom's Revenge. In the 25th spot is Corkscrew at Cedar Point. This is where we kind of draw a line as it's not trying to kill you. Corkscrew at Cedar Point is by no means a comfortable ride. It hurts, but it's not giving people serious injuries. This coaster has a double corkscrew and a loop, so it theoretically has a better layout than an aero corkscrew, but it's not better because it's generally more painful. This ride also has a deep history with being the first loop, as well as just being a cool addition to go over Cedar Point's midways. Slightly better than corkscrew is Anaconda at King's Dominion. This is an aero looper with a fully fledged layout, however, it has a problem with many of the other aero loopers so far on this list. It's uncomfortable, and there are tons of headbanging. I keep on saying this, but no hate goes out to Aero. They calculated all their layouts by hand and were super innovative, so keep that in mind, but it doesn't change the fact that it's rough. Also, the mid-course on this ride brings it to a crawl, and there's some very pointless elements that are just painful. In the 23rd spot is the Corkscrew Clone. I've actually been on one of these, and it's probably one of the most obscure corkscrews ever. I don't think I've said this on this channel yet, but I went to Callaway Park in Calgary. Yeah, it's a very random park. But I did ride the aero corkscrew there, and from my experience on the one model of this clone, it was very smooth and somewhat enjoyable. There are some forces, but it's literally just a double corkscrew. I can't say that it's the same case across all the installments, but the iconic corkscrew clone falls short because of its lackluster layout. Next up is the Loop and Corkscrew, which is a clone. This takes the double corkscrew and adds a loop, kind of like Cedar Point's corkscrew, except that it is a custom layout. For the same reasons as corkscrew, it's better than the other arrows, but it has that extra element to put it ahead of the corkscrew clone. Roller Coaster at Al Shab Leisure Park lands in the 21st spot. This is kind of like a loop and corkscrew because, well, it does a loop and a corkscrew. It also has some light sketchy theming and some weird profiling to get around, so it's slightly better than a looping corkscrew, but it is basically the same thing. Next up in the 20th spot is Big Dipper or Gold Coaster. This is a custom looper that drops meanders around a whole lot, then hits a pair of inversions with a sidewinder and a loop. These deliver some good positive Gs, but this coaster is pretty rough, and it does a whole bunch of nothing, so it ends up here. Double Loop is next up, and this coaster is exactly what the name implies. Aero loops are some of the best loops on the planet, so 2 of them back-to-back deliver some pretty good forces. Now, these were not as strong as some of the other aero loops, but it was smooth enough to deliver a good enough ride experience. In the 18th spot is Corkscrew at Valleyfair. Like a lot of coasters we are talking about, this aero does a corkscrew and a loop. However, it's a custom model because of the extra meandering that it does, so it ends up here. Drachen Fire takes what we were talking about and brings it up a step. It has 2 loops and 2 corkscrews, so it beats out the competition there. Carolina Cyclone is also the same way. It has 2 loops and 2 corkscrews. These coasters were basically identical and hard to rank, but they take up the 17th and 16th spot. In the 15th spot is the Dragon. This aero looper has a really good layout, probably one of the best so far, except for the first 2, but we don't talk about those. Like pretty much every aero looper, there's a good amount of forces, but it's uncomfortable and gives headbanging, so it ends up here. I just want to say this coaster has a super cool color scheme, like maybe one of the best in the world. Next up is Great American Scream Machine. This is a 7-inversion looper with probably one of the best layouts so far. This is a lot more familiar to people because it only went defunct 13 years ago and is located at Six Flags Great Adventure, so some of you may have rode this. Like every aero looper, this one gets docked for roughness, though everyone's tolerance to roughness is slightly different, so I can't really subtract from the coaster here unless it's consistently rough across the board. We just have better coasters coming up, so it lands here. And the 13th spot is Rolling X Train at Everland. This is not an amazing layout, it's 2 loops and a double corkscrew. This is on the smoother side of aero loopers, especially because it got sideless trains in the 2004 season. I think this is the only aero looper that has them, so that's pretty cool. There are a few potholes in the track, but overall a solid coaster that does a lot with a little layout. Theming at California's Great America is similar to Rolling X Train in the fact that they are super smooth and have tiny layouts. I absolutely love theming and thought it was smoother than Patriot, which is a B&M in the same park. The theming adds on a nice touch, and it's a really short but sweet aero looper that, of course, like all arrows, pull good forces. Theming at Six Flags Great America is up next. This is a clone of Demon that has slightly better theming, so if it has the same amount of roughness, it is better. Viper at Darien Lake starts off our top 10. Viper's layout is significantly worse than some coasters that we have talked about so far. If you compare this 5-inversion coaster to something like Great American Scream Machine 7 inversions, yeah, it's weak. The thing is, this coaster is on the smoother side of aero loopers, so it uses that to beat out its competition. In the 9th spot is Loch Ness Monster. This iconic aero has those interlocking loops, and while it may not be the best ride in the world, it's very solid in every category. There are good forces, it's relatively smooth, and it does what it's supposed to do while looking very cool. Orient Express is next up. This aero looper also has interlocking loops, but it has a completely different layout. One thing to note is that the interlocking loops looked cooler on this coaster because it used less supports. This coaster is different than Loch Ness because it contains a batwing which supported the name of the Kamikaze turn, which is actually so sick. But anyways, the layout is slightly better, so it puts it up ahead. Fantasia Special is up next. This aero looper is incredibly unique. It starts out with a triple corkscrew, which is literally insane, and then it follows up with a double loop. This is also another insanely well-colored coaster. It opened up being all red, but I'm so happy they repainted it to the 3-color palette it is now because it looks sick. Also, it's SBNL right now, so I really hope it opens up sometime soon. Starting off our top 5 is Vortex. Vortex has a very complete layout that delivers in every aspect. There are good positive Gs like pretty much every coaster on this list, but the important part is that it's smooth. Also, there's a surprising pop of ejector airtime on the first drop in the back row, so that's pretty cool, I guess. This coaster also has a cool color palette, which adds a whole lot, but maybe I'm just a sucker for multicolored track, but I really like it. And the 4th spot is Dragon Mountain. This aero is just odd, that's the best way to put it. It's an insanely long ride with super awkward segments, and it's just really strange. It's so quirky that it makes the whole ride experience better, and that combined with some decently good elements, aka the vertical loops, and you have yourself a good ride. It also has some half-assed theming, like literally half-done theming, and is a terrain coaster. This is one of the most unique coasters in the world and one of the best aero loopers. Before we start off our top 3, I just want to make a quick announcement, and that is to join our Discord server. We're trying to get it a little more active, and I like talking to people there, so if you ever want to talk coasters or anything in general, join the Discord, link in the description, because I really want to meet some of you guys. Okay, so Viper at Magic Mountain lands itself in the 3rd spot. This is the last aero mega looper on the planet, and it's pumping out trains pretty much every day. This ride is insanely forceful with the 3 loops in the batwing. I just can't believe how fast you go through the loops. If you are at the front of the train, you just get like slammed into them, and if you're in the back, you get whipped out of them. It's crazy. There's a decent amount of roughness, but it's very tolerable and makes for a half-decent ride. Canyon Blaster is another aero looper that I have ridden and lands itself in the 2nd spot. I love this coaster for one main reason, theming. I think it's so cool what Adventure Dome did with this coaster and how it just winds itself around the entire park. This in a forceful layout is pretty much a recipe for a world-class coaster. It's also on the smoother side. I still prefer El Loco to this coaster, and while it may not be the longest ride ever, it's still really cool flying around all the rock work and enough to place it at the number 2 for aero loopers. And the award for the best aero looper goes to Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood. Like Dragon Mountain, this is a terrain coaster that has some interesting moments. This coaster hauls through its layout and pulls some amazing forces. It does make it for a short ride, especially because the layout doesn't have much, just 2 loops and a sidewinder, but it has its moments and it has good pacing. It's also one of the smoothest aero loopers out there, which is probably the best quality about this coaster and the reason why people say it's the best aero looper of all time. So that's every aero looper rank for you. If you guys could tell, this is not my favorite model ever, but I still really do appreciate these rides. One thing that I found really interesting is that these coasters have some of the best color palettes in the world. Like, I literally can't stop looking at Dragon. That coaster looks like the Blast X Spectre from Valorant. Anyways, that's all for today's video, guys. As always, make sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.